Everybody knows that Santa Claus lives in the North Pole with his elves. What a lot of people don't know is that the idea of elves living in the North Pole, or at least in northern Canada, is a very ancient idea that comes from Indigenous Canadian folklore. I say Indigenous because it's both Inuit and Dene, which you wouldn't call Inuit First Nations. I think they came over across the Bering Strait land bridge, if you believe that theory, later than the Dene did, and the Dene came earlier than the proto Aboriginals from whom most of the American natives can trace their origin. I've done a few videos on this subject before. One of them is, I think, literally called Elves from the North Pole, More Than a Fairy Tale. And that's one of the earliest videos I did on this, the different native legends. Not just native legends, also explorer stories of elves in the North Pole. And I did another one later on additional stories I'd come across. And I'll link to both of those videos in the description in case you want to check them out. But in this video, we're going to read some comments on my channel from subscribers who have had their own encounters with little people in northern Canada, or in Alaska, in the north. So let's go through and check them out. First one is by Paul Sherman, 7802, 5 years ago. I worked with an Inuit woman. I sneezed once and said, "God bless all the wee folk I blowed away." She looked at me in surprise and said, "How do you know about them?" They would come to our village and steal our fish. And that's a common thing I see all the time with little people and with wild men. They steal fish from drying racks, from smokehouses, that sort of thing. That's a super, super common theme. Next one is Northwest Olympics 1630, 5 years ago. The natives along the Yukon River told me about the little people. Everyone there believes it. All I know. So Yukon River is a big river, goes from Yukon, Canada's Yukon territory, flows out into Alaska. I think the terminus, like the mouth of it, is St. Michael's, Alaska. So it could be Alaska or Yukon territory. Next one is Dakine 9445, 5 years ago. I grew up here in Alaska. Over 25 years ago, a friend of mine was very adamant that there were little people that lived above the Arctic Circle. He and his family were Alaska Native Indian / Eskimo, and all were always rather adamant that they either witnessed these little people or heard a lot about them. Next one is Denny Sorino, 6972, 5 years ago. I grew up in the Inupiaq villages up in the Arctic of Alaska. The old women and the old men used to tell us little white children, as we became friends with the native kids, many stories of these little people. I forgot the Inupiaq name, but got similar stories from elders as we moved to other villages. The best and most interesting stories of these encounters were told by elders I knew in Tikigaq, Port Hope. Weird stuff. I believe all of it. Very interesting to find this piece. Thank you. Next one's from Sharon Weir, 8513, 1 year ago. I'm from Nunavut, and throughout my life I've heard of the legends of the giants and the little people. My grandparents and mom are from the Black River region, on Chantry Inlet. No one has any idea how vast the tundra truly is until you're here. I sometimes wonder if there are still Inuit living as nomads to this day. Next one, Six Figure Ski Bum, 5 years ago. So cool. I mean, I spent a minute in Alaska, and while I had no encounter with the little people, I did spend a very negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit night out, no tent, north of the circle, and woke up to a crackling, buzzing sound. The lights had come down into the valley, and moved about and spoke. Now all the white folks I told laughed at me. Maybe is by lights he's referring to the northern lights? I don't know. My native Alaskan Dene friends listened and explained how lucky I was. It's as rare as seeing one of the little men, they said. I asked about what little men, and they told me about what sounded like a leprechaun who plays a mortal trick. That you should never follow him no matter how much you yearn to, as you'll follow him over the horizon, and then he'll lose you and left you standing to die of frost. Anyhow, that's what they told me, and I can recall from 20 years ago. So that's interesting. I didn't know that could happen. The northern lights can come into the valley and be crackling around you. That sounds like a crazy experience. Okay, next one. Jerry Weiss, 5 years ago. When I had worked in the eastern Canadian Arctic at a place called Broughton Island, some of the local Inuit had told me about some of their ancestors. These ancestors were supposedly very small, yet very strong. I believe that they called them the Thule, or Thule. And that's another common theme with these little people. They're always wrestlers, or very often they're wrestlers, and they challenge humans to wrestling matches in these old native stories, and they're extremely strong. And on that subject, there was a subscriber who got in touch with me, but it was like a third-hand story, but he ended up corroborating it with the guy who it happened to. So technically a first-hand story of a guy, like a native, like I think a Cree native from northern Winnipeg, northern Manitoba, who, like on the northern end of Lake Winnipeg, had encountered one of these things in the bush while he was basically hanging out with some friends, just drinking beer by the fire. And he was kind of an irreverent guy, didn't really respect his ancestral traditions, and so he kicked this thing, and he says it was like a rock, and the thing grabbed his pants, and he like barely managed to escape, something like that. You gotta watch the video. I'll link to that in the description. But yeah, they're always very strong, like way stronger than you'd think they'd be. The next one is Bill Smith, 4670, 1 year ago. My grandparents and mother are from the Nome area in Alaska, and would warn us children not to go very far up the river alone, because of little people much like these that live near the river, and would either help you or steal from you and get you lost. And that's another recurring theme. They're always mischievous, and they will either trick you and try to get you lost in the woods, or steal stuff from you, or in some cases they help people, like when they help people who were lost find their way back home or something like that. So they're tricksters. Next one's Aunt Just Given Her, 4 years ago. Auntie Just Given Her, 4 years ago. I think little people are real up in the north, because 2 teachers that I know quite well has had experiences / seen them before, and one of them took pictures of their little tiny feet all around their house in the winter time. Interesting. Next one's Boxcar Willie, 3560, 5 years ago. What's a fascinating rabbit hole to go down is the pygmies' battle with the giant cranes. I'm a collector of old maps, and I was very pleased to run across your channel. Thank you for taking the time to enlighten those who care to listen. So he's referring to, I can't remember which one this is, maybe like the Mercator map or something. It might be the Mercator map. It's from, I think, the 1500s, and there's a map of the North Pole, and there's pygmies on it, and right next to them are cranes. I think in one of my videos, I misinterpreted this as storks or something, but yeah, they're cranes, and the legend is that the pygmies would battle with the cranes, and correct me if I'm wrong, I might be wrong about this. I feel like that comes from Pliny the Elder, but I could be wrong. But anyway, in old maps from the 1500s of the North Pole, there were pygmies that were supposed to battle with cranes. If you'd like to watch this video without ads, please consider becoming a member of this channel and watching the ads-free version instead. You can do this on your phone or desktop by clicking the picture of my face and then clicking the join button to the right of the subscribe button. For only $2 Canadian per month, or about $1.45 US, you can watch my members-only videos, and get an icon of a little Canadian monster beside your name every time you post a comment on my channel, which will change with the amount of time you've been a member. Since times are tough, I've decided to add a lower membership tier, which will give you access to my members-only videos for only $1 Canadian per month, or about 72 American cents. For my viewers in Madagascar who can't afford this, I apologize. Sorry for the interruption, and enjoy the video. Next one is Baseline 5633, 5 years ago. Thank you for the information, and I perceive that the tale of small elves in the north is a result of 2 separate tales. For one, there's definitely a Viking story on short men in the New World. However, tales of elves actually began with the Albus or Alban people, who migrated into northern Europe from the north of the Black Sea. They were actually said to be tall in stature, fair, beautiful, with pointed ears. It is said in some anthropology circles that the Alban, along with the Alon peoples, were Indo-European in origin, which could make sense when considering their stature. Yet their names are Semitic, and that is the peculiar part. So then somehow, some way, the 2 tales must have intertwined. After all this, I would like to make clear that I'm not claiming a pygmy or dwarven race did not exist. Some tribes claim they were accompanied by pygmy and giant races in their folklore, such as the New Zealander indigenous, several or more North American tribes, yeah, that's an understatement, and Hindu Valley peoples. So it's possible that the Nords encountered smaller Inuit, and Inuit encountered smaller people than them. It does say that in the Viking sagas. I think it's the Greenlander saga. They have the Norse Vikings who came to the Americas had a battle with, they call the Skrælingjar, which are like, I think, natives, but they said they were short in stature. So I don't know if that just means like shorter than the Vikings were, or were they really short? And I think in the saga of Eric the Red, which is the same story, but I think it was written maybe 100 years later or something like that, the Skrælingjar live in holes in the ground, which is a common theme in northern little people stories. They live in the ground. or in the mountains, in holes and caves. I don't know much about the Alban people. I don't know anything about that, so I won't comment on that. I don't know if there's any connection to this, but I know that the old name for Britain, the Isle of Britain, is Albion. That's one of the old names for it. I don't know if there's a connection with the Alban people or not. Next one is Rossman Ferguson, 3662, 3 years ago. I'm a Nupiaq Eskimo from Alaska, and I've seen only one little Eskimo in my lifetime. Our people call them Imanarak. Oh, Imanarak. I'm not pronouncing that right, I'm sure. Next one, Cheryl Walter, 387, 5 years ago. All the cute fairy tale creatures are real, only they are not all cute. I have seen them and have hundreds of pics of all types of beings. I call them the Littles. I have also seen fairies in the Alaskan woods that were far from cute. They were green in color, a little duller than a leaf color, and they had what looked like antennas. My brothers and I seen a group of them while building a treehouse. Believe it or not, I don't really care. I live in Idaho now, and have pics of all sorts of demon-like creatures. The woods are full of them. They can cloak to where you cannot see them with the naked eye, but you can feel them. I have many pics where they are in the process of cloaking. Some allow me to just watch them, but when I go to take a pic, they cloak or have the ability to blur their pics. Go out in the woods, you will see them. You can't go out once or twice and then call us liars. You need to spend quality time out there. They are there. Okay, next one is Bronco Joe, Alaska, 1 year ago. The little people are real. They literally just stole my keys and returned them when I asked about an hour ago. I live in Alaska, by the way. I've seen them on one occasion where they stole a hammer, returned it, and I watched 3 of them about knee-high, butt naked as I jumped into the tall grass in my yard and disappeared a few years ago. Ever since then, I've had multiple instances when they just play pranks on me, and after acknowledging them and their prank, they give it back. I learned of them originally after my first encounter with them when my dad told me they stole his hatchet when he was hunting about 10 years before my birth. Just be respectful of them, laugh at their pranks, and thank them for their humor. Otherwise, you may go to bed angry that they stole your hammer and wake up to find they have stolen your arm. Or worse, they may steal your head. So that's another common theme. This is a theme from actually Huldufólk stories from New Iceland, which is like the Interlakes region in Manitoba between Lake Winnipeg and Lake Manitoba. There's a huge population of Icelandic Canadians in there, like kind of this rural square of land called New Iceland. And the Huldufólk stories from there, Huldufólk means hidden people in Icelandic, and it's like an elf story that they for sure took with them from the old world. But in the Huldufólk stories, they steal your stuff, and you can politely ask for it back, and it'll appear maybe in a place you didn't expect. But it'll always be something that's like clothespins or a knife sheath, things you wouldn't think were useful, but the elves must have some use for them, according to these stories. Next one is Jeanette West, 3 years ago. We have them here in southwest Alaska. You don't ever talk about them directly, otherwise they may take notice, which is not a good thing. I have seen one and never want to see another. There are places where doorways from our dimension or theirs swing both ways, and they can enter. We stay away from those areas. So the idea of not talking about them reminds me of Newfoundland fairy stories, where they don't call them fairies. The Newfoundlanders will call them the good people, even though their interactions with them wouldn't lend you to believe that that's an appropriate name for them because they're very mischievous and they play pranks on people. But they call them the good people to avoid offending them. And they don't call them fairies. So that's another interesting commonality. Okay, next one is Stephen Jones 101, 3 years ago. I met one of these little guys when I was a child in Alaska. We called them shrimpkins. I had gotten lost in the forest and had just nibbled on some mushrooms. Uh-oh. He was dressed in a green moss-like coat with pants made from a polar bear fur, and was holding a bottle of whiskey and looked to be fairly inebriated. It was when he laughingly yelled, "Shore and Bagora," and scampered away with a pot of gold, that I knew these little shrimpkins were advanced scouts for the great northern migration of leprechauns. Okay, I didn't vet these too well, obviously. I wonder if that's real. People call them shrimpkins up north? I don't know. Alaskans, let me know. Next one is 907 Prism, 3 years ago. There are legends here in Alaska about these people too. I know of a couple of stories where people were misled off the trail during their snow machine rides. One guy was led into the ocean with his snow machine. He wasn't found until summer. Some see strange lights. Others think they see a village, but as they head towards the village, the lights would get farther away and some people disappear. Yeah, that's dark, but that's another super common theme with it's like the Newfoundland fairy stories. When I was doing stuff on the comparison between Scandinavian and Canadian folk tales, almost all of the creatures that they have will try to mislead you by making you hallucinate, by making you see things that aren't there, like phantom lights. So the proclivity of these things in the woods, these little mischievous tricksters in the woods to get you lost and lead you astray, seems to be a super common theme, not only in Canada, but also other parts of the world that have stories like these. Next one is Living Alaskan Native 3301, 3 years ago. One elder from my village was playing down the beach with friends, and they saw a little person. It was trying to tell the kids to follow into the darkness, but they were too scared, or too smart. They thought the little person was a child like them, from another village. Creepy. Next one is Dolores J. Nurse 3 years ago. A friend of mine lived in Alaska for a while. She saw a little man walking some distance away, and took him for a human dwarf. But then he reached a construction site, knelt down, hugged his knees, and turned into an old tire, right in front of her eyes. She went up and touched it. It was an old tire. It's possible that one might see a tire from a distance and mistake it for a small, kneeling person hugging his knees, but not likely that one would see that tire walking first, looking like a tiny man. Agreed. Anyway, she speculated that he might have wanted to spy on the construction going on, and that's a theme I remember from interior Salish legends of little people. They can transform into cedar trees. That's what they always transform into. So this is not the first little people story I've heard where they're supposed to be able to shapeshift. If you want to watch my video on that, I'll link to that in the description as well. Next one is Surrealist 1976, 3 years ago. In Greenland, we call them Alliarutsit. The myth says they live between land and ocean/water. They don't have noses. If they kidnap a kid, the kid turn Alliarutsit by losing the nose. They sometimes is invisible to adults, and only kids could see them. Interesting comment about the nose, because that's a thing from Cree dwarf stories. The Cree little people are supposed to have weird noses, I think. Very ugly faces and strange noses. Like, I want to say it's like their mouth, like their bottom lip goes up and covers their nose or something like that. I talk about it in another video. I'll link to that video in the description as well. So it's just a quick edit post-production. I had to look through my notes and my old writings, and Robert Brightman's anthropologist who did work on the Rock Cree from Granville Lake, Manitoba, which is in northern Manitoba. Rock Cree's like, I think, an offshoot of the Woodland Cree. And in his description of the Rock Cree little people, he says that the Mimikwisuak are a small race of furtive hominid beings associated with water and or riparian rocky cliffs. In other words, like riverside rocky cliffs. The Mimikwisuak are about the size of a 5-year-old boy and are covered with hair and lack noses. The latter feature is particularly disgusting to some Crees. And then in a different article, he wrote that the dwarf noses were described as simply holes in the face. So that's the kind of northern woodland Cree interpretation of what the dwarves look like. So very weird to have this similarity, like no noses for both the Cree and the Inuit. That's a really interesting similarity. Okay, let's continue. Next one's Fred in Alaska 3 years ago. I'm in Alaska, and I've been getting recent little people sightings from the villages I'm in contact with. Interesting accounts. Next one is Perceive 9600, 1 year ago. I was working on Baffin Island a few years ago. Early one morning, I happened to wake up and open my eyes. In that exact moment, the door to my Quonset-style tent popped open. There was nothing defective about the door upon inspection, and I could not recreate it. Kind of a boring story, but my sixth sense was telling me it was little people out on the barren tundra. Also, the old Hudson's Bay trading post in Iqaluit is very noisy at night, like someone is in there still, taking inventory, and going about the post's operations. Interesting, so an Iqaluit ghost story. Iqaluit is the tiny little capital of Nunavut, which is the easternmost of the 3 northern territories in Canada. And that's the first Iqaluit story about anything unusual I've ever heard, which is pretty neat. Next one's Gina Fournier, 5330, 1 year ago. A youngster went missing on our res in northern Canada for a week, and then suddenly showed back up at home, clean and no worse for wear. When asked where she had been, and with who, she told her parents the little people took care of her and brought her back home. She said they were in the mountain caves. That's a super common story from Newfoundland where people will go missing and then they'll show up, no worse for wear, little kids, Actually, that's not true. Not no worse for wear. A lot of times physically and mentally, they're really messed up. And they'll say the little people will have taken them. But in a few stories, people return unharmed, especially if they're little girls. I've read maybe 3 stories about that, with little girls who will go missing, lost in the woods, like way too young to take care of themselves, and will be returned to their home, as if somebody had been taking care of them, and they're no worse for wear. They would say the little people took care of them. And the detail about the mountain caves is interesting because that is like the northern Cree. They said that they lived in the mountains. I'm sorry, that's not right. The Cree said they lived on the top of, like in caves and on riverside cliffs and lakeside cliffs and stuff. I think the mountain thing is a Dene thing. And it's also a Stony thing, unrelated. Stony from the Rocky Mountains. Next one is Steam Engineer 100, 1 year ago. My friend Steve, who is older than I am, said to me that he saw a couple of little people once. They wore what looked like older-style clothing. He's got a good enough memory to mention it to me years later. In Elven Cove, Alaska, aptly named Elven Cove. So the old-fashioned clothes, that's a Huldufólk, when people see them, are supposed to be wearing old-fashioned clothes. In the Madawaska Highlands, the Kashubian Canadians, Polish Canadians, say that their dwarves wear old-fashioned clothes. And other Inuit stories I've heard that they're supposed to be wearing kind of old-style caribou skin robes, the old dress that the natives used to wear a long time ago. Next one is Curtis X. Curtis, 1 year ago. I live in northern Canada. I've never seen a little person, but I've seen evidence of little people. There is a small island near my hometown. On that island has a very small cave that goes into the island. On the beach of that island I saw a set of very small footprints. About 1 inch ahead of each footprint were toenails digging into the sand that lead to a very small cave opening. The cave opening was less than 2 feet tall, and the footprints were about 5 inches long. Interesting. Next one is Mikhail Schumann, TT Skoo 3 months ago. I found little people tracks going through my yard in North Pole, Alaska. So more stories of little people tracks. And last one, this is a big one. It's from Widgets 5210, 11 months ago. I've been waiting for what felt like a good moment to mention my experience, and this feels as good a moment as I'm ever to see. It's not a shocking, traumatic, or threatening thing I have to relate, but just a single footprint. I'd gone out into the relatively unexplored woods adjacent to the town of Sitka, Alaska, with a friend in order to set up a deer camp. The place was approximately 4 to 5 miles out, and in an area that's not routinely hiked to by the usual off-trail hikers, or for that matter, the average black-tailed deer hunter. We spent a few days out there, making the spot more habitable and setting up by way of lashing with cord that would degrade over time and let the platform up among a group of trees that drop down and become anchors for the next generation of spruce and hemlock. Anyhow, it had been a good time out there. No unexpected weirdness and no injuries, but the time had come for us to return to town and responsibility. So we loaded up the packs with everything that didn't need to be there and headed back to town. Toward town. We took a path that I had not been down before, and at about 1 to 1.5 miles from the camp, my attention was drawn to a small but steadily flowing stream, and in the mud/clay/ash stream bed was a small footprint. A small, bare, human, so far as I could tell, footprint. It was about 5 inches long and 3 inches wide, and was washed away in the course of 30 to 45 seconds. Now the direction we were headed was roughly south, and the footprint in the stream bed indicated that whatever had left it was traveling from east to west. If we had been near town, I could have shrugged it off as a child's footprint. Someone had taken their kid out to experience the ground. Cedar and hemlock needle duff and rock and water that made up the surface of the planet in that particular location. But at about 4 miles out, no. There was no adequate explanation for a tiny bare footprint to appear in the silt of a stream. None. And then it was gone, washed away entirely, and nothing moved in my field of view. So to sum it up, something or someone left a footprint in the bed of a flowing stream. It had been traveling east to west, the print was entirely erased under a minute, and there was nothing evident by sight, sound, or smell that could have left that print. If you've never been there, the old-growth forests in southeast Alaska are strangely noisy. It's a temperate rainforest, and all the dripping, gurgling, splashing, and general white noise, or pink noise of the place, makes it really challenging to hear much of anything, especially if you're wearing a brimmed cap or a hat with a brim all the way around, or rain gear with a hood pulled up. But you can always hear the squirrels. They are the motion tracking devices. Think aliens and the motion trackers used in that film. I don't know what that's referring to. Of the forest. And they will let you know when someone or something is moving around. The squirrels were silent in those few minutes we took to test with a stick to see how long a mark would remain evident in that stream. And that silence is really challenging to deal with. It's as if the symphony conductor for the Forest of Sounds raised his baton and just held it, holding silence, holding just long enough for the recognition to set in for the stupid humans that something bigger yet smaller had made its way across the page, and when far enough away, so as to not be seen or followed, the baton dropped and the sounds came back on with a crash of squeaking and barking. And the ravens and crows started up their chatter and mimicry of water sounds. It was time to go. There was nothing to chase. That experience had happened, and it was clear that it had its intended effect. 2 humans had seen something that declined explanation. It was a strange gift to be given. It's more challenging to share because folks just don't have a grip on what that place is. The primordial forest, the place where water rules the land. It's a wholly different thing compared to the forest that surrounds the great mountains of Ohio or Indiana, the Rocky Mountains and their aspen and conifers, or the big leaf maple of the Pacific Northwest. I'm glad to have had that experience, among so many others, and that I've had the years that let the story remain true. I mean, I've come at it from as many directions as I can conceive, and it's still inexplicable in the mundane world of telephones and city buses. That's what I have to share. Let me know if you got anything similar. It's good to be reminded that the world is more mystery than mastery. So that is a very interesting, well-written comment, and another story about a tiny human footprint in the wilderness that shouldn't be there. Which is, I did a story on the experience of my friend J.R. Lucas of the Great Canadian Camouflage Company, who had a similar experience near Bancroft, Ontario. And I'll link to that video as well in the description. So, interesting stories of elves up north. Thanks for watching, and Merry Christmas.